Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Lincoln. For those who don't know me, director of the Center for Jewish Civilization here at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. I am really delighted to welcome Dr. Stephen A. Cook, who will be the next Andrew H. Siegel Visiting Professor for American Foreign Policy in the Middle East at the Center for Jewish Civilization in this coming academic year. We are going to talk a bit about what he plans to teach and some of his upcoming work in a second, but just so we know who we're talking to here. Stephen is also the NE Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's an expert on Arab and Turkish politics as well as U.S. Middle East policy. He's authored several books. His most recent was The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East. I don't think he predicted exactly where we are today, but
I did have stuff to say about where we are today.
All right, well, we'll ask you about that. But also False Dawn, Protest, Democracy, and Violence in the New Middle East, The Struggle for Egypt from Nasser to Tahrir Square, which won the 2012 gold medal from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and of course, Ruling but Not Governing, Military and Political Development in Egypt, Algeria, and Turkey. Cook is also, Stephen's also a columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. He's also published widely in international affairs journals, et cetera, et cetera. I also want to just say, on a personal note, that when I was way back when a research assistant at the Council on Foreign Relations, Stephen had just really started this.
I was a child.
And you were really a child. I was really a child. And Stephen has really been a tremendous source of support and mentorship, really, for me in my own career in international diplomacy. So I'm delighted to welcome you here. Just to, in terms of housekeeping, we're going to speak for about 30 minutes or so about Iran, the U.S. and Israel conflict and consequences, and then open it up to the audience for question and answer. Stephen, welcome. Really delighted that you're going to be joining us also on our faculty. I think it's a tremendous addition. Not just to the CJC, but really the university as a whole. So before we get into the topic of the day, though, just to sort of preview a little bit about what you're going to be doing for us, I wanted to ask you about your courses for next year. So please tell us what your plan is.
So far, just one course. I have one idea in my head at the moment, and it's really actually. So let me just say that by way of getting into what I'm teaching, is that I have a history of saying I will never. And then shortly thereafter, I do exactly what I said I'd never do. I said I would never live in Philadelphia. And 2 years later, I was moving to Philadelphia to start my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. I said I never would live in like Montgomery County. I'd always live like in the city. I live in Montgomery County. And I said I would never write a book about Israel. And it turns out I'm writing a book about Israel. I'm just at the very beginning. This book isn't even under contract. But when Jonathan asked me to join the faculty, which I was thrilled to do, I've had a whole career in think tank land, but I could have been an academic, but I don't like going to faculty meetings. So I figured that would be like the depth of me. Well, when you have tenure, you don't have to go, but yeah, who knows? Yeah. So I never wanted to have to do any of that stuff, but I really enjoyed teaching. So I came up with this idea of, as a forcing function for me, to teach a course about Israel, so that I have written about Israel in my last book. I wrote a bit about Israel in the Egypt book, but I felt like now is the time. I got an itch to write a book. If you look at my books, they all build on each other. Ruling but Not Governing begat The Struggle for Egypt. The Struggle of Egypt begat The End of it. False Dawn. False Dawn begat. Is that the right word? Begat The End of Ambition. At the End of Ambition, there is a long chapter. Well, not the book's only 150 pages. There was a long chapter. The first draft of my Israel chapter was 100 pages. But there's a chapter on Israel and about the U.S. and Israel, and it got me. I got an itch about Israel more generally, And I felt like the kind of the literature out there is lacking in a variety of ways. And so I proposed this to the folks at the Council on Foreign Literature. They think it's a great idea. My literary agent thinks it's a great idea. Now it's on me to actually write a book proposal. So my course is called Normalizing Israel. And so it's a forcing function for me to learn and write alongside of the students who choose to enroll in the class. And it'll be, I think, a tremendous amount of fun because how often do people at my old age get to like really, really dig into something new and write about it? I see writing as a problem solving exercise. So this will be, I just think, a really fun semester long adventure on a extremely controversial topic that I plan to untangle in a larger work. So that's the course. I hope you take it. It'll be fun.
Very brave of you, and no doubt you can take advantage of the student labor to help you with the.
I never take advantage of student labor, but I do enjoy student insights.
Yes,
you know, there are plenty of times where students will, you know, say something that, "Hey, I hadn't thought about that. That's actually a really interesting idea." Let me say a little bit more about the book project. Is that, I mean, one of the things I wrote a 5-page concept paper. I think you read it. In Israel's become this sort of phantasm, this like, you know, this or apparition or things that people say about it, no matter where you are on the fault line of Zionism or anti-Zionism, that like don't really register in reality. It's whichever place that people fall on that spectrum, and there's no in between. That's the kind of books that are written, and I think that they're not necessarily designed to illuminate. I think they're and educate, which is what we're supposed to be doing and advancing knowledge. I think that they're very often part of a political project to recruit members to a team. And that's, I don't think, what people are here for. And so I wanted to write a book modeled a lot like my Struggle for Egypt book, like just a kind of big book on this topic that comes, you know, interesting things that sort of doesn't pull any punches, but avoids the kind of the ideology first kind of aspect of a lot of the recent work on the topic.
sounds exciting, and interesting, and I think it'll be a great addition to our.
Well, I'll be an outcast by everybody, and then I can go off and like do what I really want to do, which is like wax skis and some ski.
Yeah, that's good.
So, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay, well,
it's my exit strategy.
If we can help you,
like the JCPOA was the U.S. exit strategy. This book is my exit strategy.
Excellent, very good segue.
Yes, exactly. I thought about that.
Thank you for mentioning the JCPOA. So, I mean, I think you know, as we you know, so thank you for that, Stephen. Thing we really look forward to.
Thank you for the offer. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So, you know, as we're looking at, you know, Iran, the U.S., and Israel, maybe we start with the U.S. I think that's appropriate given where we are, of course. And as we were talking before, you know, we mentioned that Trump is actually the second U.S. president that more or less won their elections by running on a platform of no more U.S. wars in the Middle East. And both, of course, Obama in Libya and now Trump in Iran. Have gotten the United States entangled in different ways, but in conflicts in the Middle East, North Africa. Can you maybe start by helping us understand how we got
here? Yeah. Look, first, before I start, I think that the Libya and Iran thing, I think the parallels are really, really interesting. And you know, my view of this is as an objective, as much as possible, observer of what's happening. And so there's a lot of freaking out about what the president has done, deservedly so. But there was also a situation where you had a president of the United States who was lobbied heavily by not one, but two countries with which it has a special relationship to undertake military operations in the Middle East to essentially engage in regime change. And one of the stated objectives was to protect the people. Help was on the way. And President Obama then ordered the U.S. military to bomb Libya, and we bombed Libya for 7 months. There was no declaration of war. There was none of those things. And it was, you know, you reverse the situation, we were on the right side of history. And we're having a very, very similar debate today, except that our politics, the stakes in our politics are seem to be higher. And we're having that debate in a kind of social media drenched, 24-hour cable news network, polarized environment that is extraordinarily difficult to navigate. And so it seems like this is something that is completely unprecedented when it's something that happened previously. And it's something that happened again to a president who said no more wars in the Middle East. You know, President Obama and President Trump have often said the same thing in very different ways. In The End of Ambition, my last book, I sort of traced, President Trump said, we spent $7 trillion on the Middle East. We could have rebuilt the United States 3 times. Well, we didn't spend $7 trillion on the Middle East. And I don't think we could rebuild the United States 3 times with $7 trillion. But it was similar to what President Obama said when his famous speech when he was a state senator about not being against war, but being against stupid wars. So what's extraordinary about this moment, however, is that this president ran 3 times against foreign policy entanglements in the Middle East. When you go on YouTube. I had to do this for End of Ambition. I recreated the whole thing. It was really fun. Watch his 2015 The Escalator speech announcing that he was running for president. I recreated it in the book. It's very funny. Politicians don't, by the way, as an aside, they don't listen to the lyrics of the songs that they pick.
Oh, yes.
So the song that they picked as he comes down the escalator and gets up on the stage and Ivanka's, bopping to is Rockin' in the Free World.
Yeah.
Neil Young. It's like this denunciation of the United States, this searing social critique of the United States. I don't think they really intended that in any event, but it's Rockin' in the Free World. So it sounded cool. In any event, watch that speech. It's a foreign policy speech, and it's a lot about the Middle East. Everybody remembers, they're sending their rapists and drug dealers and stuff. Get beyond that and listen to it. It is a lot of that is about entanglements in the Middle East. And then fast forward to last May when he was in Riyadh. He gave a speech about, hey, we're not going to nation build. We're not going to tell people how to live. We're not going to do these kinds of things any longer. I mean, I wrote about it. I thought it was a really good speech. I thought it echoed a lot of the themes that I raised in End of Ambition. Mark Lynch also thought it was a great speech. Like you had really interesting mix of people who thought that was a great speech. And then suddenly we're in this situation where the president has ordered this isn't like what happened last time. This is a major military operation. I was telling people the other day, you don't just go do this and then be like, okay, we're done. This is a major change in the United States is going to be there. So how did we get here? Honestly, there's all, the stuff about Joe Kent. I don't want to get into it and all this kind of stuff, which I sort of dismiss.
We'll get to Joe in a second. But
Which I sort of dismiss, if only because what the president has been telling people for now 11 years, which is that he listens only to his gut. Mm-hmm. He only listens to his gut. His most important advisor is his gut, and he does what his gut tells him to do, which has allowed him, I'll use the word again, to gut the foreign policy bureaucracy so that the United States does not have a foreign policy process, right? If you know anybody who's worked in the federal government in the foreign policy space, they will bitch endlessly about the foreign policy process. Barbara?
Yeah.
Terrible. My wife works in the government. Oh my God. The endless stories, the warfare, the blocking and tackling of the policy process. But there was a reason for it. There was a reason for it. But if you only trust your gut and you think all these people are out to get you, you have 5 enablers around you. And those 5 enablers can't necessarily be trusted to say, Mr. President, for 45 years, the Islamic Republic has been saying that any effort to overthrow would result in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Have we planned for them? Have you done that? Here are the downside risks of X. Here are the downside risks of Y. Here's the upside risk, et cetera, et cetera. That hasn't happened. And so, and obviously, Israel has an interest in taking down the Iranians. And I think the president, one day he says one thing, we're not going to nation build, we're not going to do this, look at this. And then the next day, something else moves him and his gut tells him to do something else. That's honestly how I believe they got there. I think there was war planning. Absolutely. The Pentagon just doesn't do this. But I think it really has to do with the president and let me put it this way, the unique way he makes decisions. That is thoroughly unsatisfying because you can't do anything about that. You have to live with that. This is not, and the war will come to an end in a very similar way. his gut. I don't know what the input will be. Will it be gas prices? Will it be cracking of the MAGA coalition, which has not cracked. Has not cracked. I came across a polling done that the polling guy at CNN did. He's like 90% of the MAGA world supports what the president has done here. It's like it's the notable people, the Tucker Carlsons, the Joe Kents, those people. So whatever it is, he'll say, okay, we're done. And wherever we are, he'll say, those were our objectives all along, and they were fantastic. That's it.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I want to sort of go through
the unpack if I
there are also
I'm not going
challenges.
Should I interrogate a narrative? I'm going to interrogate a narrative.
It's even worse. Okay. It's even worse. But let's talk about Israel then for a second.
Okay.
I mean, how much daylight is there? And ultimately, this is a question: is the Israeli tail wagging the U.S. dog, or is this more of a U.S. domestic politics issue that you mentioned? Or is there something else?
I have no idea to what extent the Israeli tail is wagging the dog. Someone said to me today, "This is benefiting Israel," and I was like, well, "Of course, it's benefiting Israel. Like that's news, right? Like, Israel's been worried about Iran's ballistic missile program, obviously its nuclear program, the ability to sow chaos around the region. So to the extent that Israel and the United States can use a word that has now been overused a million times in the last 20 days, degrade the ability of the Iranians to sow chaos and threaten Israel's security. I mean, I don't understand why people are like, oh my God, this threatens. Of course it does. And of course, unlike the United States, 81, 82% of Israelis support what the Israeli government is doing. I think that there is, and again, to use another word that's been overused recently, unprecedented. I think there is an unprecedented amount of Israeli and American military coordination. I mean, if you'd said to me 15 years ago that American pilots and Israeli pilots would be, launching from the same Israeli airstrip to conduct joint operations against Iran, or that Israeli officers and American officers were sitting in the same, forward operations area and stuff like that, I'd be like, this was not even in CENTCOM, right? It wasn't in CENTCOM until 2020. I was like, that's crazy talk. So that is something I think and that's actually a function of the Abraham Accords and President Trump, who ordered Israel into CENTCOM. What I think is the clear difference between Israel and the United States is that I think the president would have been, and whether this is right or wrong, I mean, will be debated. I think it's wrong, but he was looking for, the Delcy Rodriguez of Iran, right? Which is a complete misreading of Delcy Rodriguez and the Iranians, right? Delcy Rodriguez. Well, the only thing about Delcy Rodriguez and Ali Larijani that have in common is they both like the really nice things in life. But Delcy Rodriguez was a leftist because the rightists killed her father. She would have been a rightist. She would have been a rightist if the leftist has killed her father. All about rent. But the IRGC guys and all this, they're ideological. So I don't. Whereas a lot of my deep Iran experts like Ray Paquet, Suzanne Maloney, and Kareem Sajapour, we have no doubt that Larijani was reaching out to interlocutors with the United States, but that's a tactic that struck them as entirely tactical. So I don't think that they were going to get that agreement. But Israelis watching the president, watching Venezuela, are making sure that can happen by offering anybody who would have any gravitas to make a deal with the United States. So I will remind you, we have no proof of life from the new Ayatollah. Ali Larijani is gone. The speaker, the head of the siege is gone. All the top ranks in the military, they're all gone. We didn't do that. The Israelis did. And the president said it on the first or second day. It's like, well, I had 3 people on mine, but they're all dead. So I think there's a real difference there. And I think the Israeli Iran analyst named Raz Simt did a long tweet about the differences between the way in which Israeli officialdom use the Iranian leadership versus the way, you know, we can talk about it here in Georgia, you know, moderates from their like wholly calculated perspective on ensuring security. He said there's really no difference between any of them, and so that gives you a hint, even though you know that the Israeli clear objective of the Israelis is to create a pathway for regime change. And like people say, oh, we can't do no boots on the ground. Well, they regard the Iranian people as boots on the ground. It's a roll of the dice, obviously a roll of the dice.
Yes.
So there is, yes, to answer your question, long way of saying there is clearly a difference between the United States and Israel on the ultimate strategic objective here. Secretary of Defense Hegseth said today, he emphasized degrading Iran's capabilities. The Israelis will say, we're degrading Iran's capabilities, but we're also destroying the repressive apparatus of the regime.
Okay. So aside from Iran and Israel, and we'll get to Lebanon in a second. So just to park that for a second, but really the most impacted, it seems, has also been the Gulf. And maybe you could help us understand a little bit about what's happening in the Gulf, in particular Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a country that only a couple of years ago embarked on a really almost surprising rapprochement with Iran, right?
Under the auspices of the Chinese.
The Chinese, exactly. And also the UAE and Qatar. They all get lumped together, but they're all quite different these days.
Right.
And they all sort of a different approach. Is there a sort of general reassessment happening right now? What's happened as a result of this war?
Yeah. Super interesting. I mean, it's a reassessment in a way that clearly the Iranians miscalculated, right? No one remembers this, but you know, the weeks before the war, the Emiratis and the Saudis were at each other's throats. You know, you had Saudi officials here and Emirati officials following them, and all lobbying everybody about which one was worse and which one was more of a threat to regional stability. The whole, you know, Saudi is a purveyor of Islamist ideology and anti-Semitism, and that was one message that was being carried to Washington, and the other message was that the Emiratis are a source of regional instability, along with their Israeli pals. And then the war breaks out, and they both get hit by the Iranians, and suddenly MBS and MBZ, who wouldn't even talk to each other, attack, and their underlings attacking each other, and so on and so forth, are sharing phone calls. You know, I think the GCC states have coalesced around each other, with some with the exception of the Omanis, who have previously acted as basically the lawyers for the Iranians. And I would point you to the foreign minister had an essay in The Economist, which I think outraged other members of the GCC. So there's been a closing of ranks. That's not to say that I think that these countries wanted the conflict. I think they made it very, very clear that they did not. They're making trillion-dollar bets on the domestic transformations of their societies, and what they need more than anything else is stability, right? And so they didn't want this chaos, and they made that very, very clear directly to the Iranians through these rapprochements, and yet the Iranians hit them anyway. And you could make the Iranian case that the Iranians left it to hitting American facilities in these countries, but they also hit the airport in Dubai. They hit, you know, fancy hotels. They're trying to undermine the model, the Gulf model. And that's, you know, the Emiratis talk about this a lot in their outrage. They say, sure, they're angry about our relationship with Israel, which is an important one to them, but they're also trying to undermine the model on the other side of the Gulf. And it's almost like, we're going down, or we're going to take everybody with us at the same time. And I think the Iranians underestimated that by hitting them, the Gulf states would be more angry about getting hit than what the United States and Israel have done.
It's interesting. So they're angry.
I mean, I could show you WhatsApp messages from various officials across the region, and I'm not going to, but they are all expressing outrage at the Iranians. Like, we don't want this, but what do the Iranians think they're accomplishing here? Yeah. And I'll point you to the Saudi foreign ministers. Like, you know, the Saudis have convened this meeting. I mean, it's like a weapon of the week. What do you do when you can't do anything about it? Oh, yeah, have a consultation. But the Saudi foreign minister had extremely, extremely tough words for the Iranians today. And I'll say you started with the rapprochement. The Saudis always complained privately that the Iranians never upheld their bargain. They're like, they still armed the Houthis. They still conducted nuclear work. They still helped Bashar al-Assad. They continued to sow chaos in the region, October 7th, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That makes us very unhappy.
Interesting. So they're angry.
They were disappointed by the rapprochement. They felt like the Iranians didn't uphold their end of the bargain. Yeah. And then now the Iranians have done that. I don't expect to see, Saudi pilots in the skies with, the Israelis.
Exactly. They're angry at the United States, but maybe they're more angry at Iran.
I think that's right.
It's interesting. I think that was reflected, following the politics of the UN. So forgive me, but when Bahrain tabled that Security Council resolution on behalf of the Arab group, it was one of the most popular. It was something like 134, 135 member states supported it. I think more member states supported this resolution, which was pretty soft on the United States and Israel and pretty harsh on Iran for its attacks, and then supported the other sort of biggest resolutions for it was an anti-Ebola resolution. So someone was saying they hate Iran more than they hate.
Well, I mean, just to give you an example,
it's quite fascinating.
The Turks really no fans of the Israelis, right? And we have our own problems with the Turks. Yeah. At this consultation today, they signed on to a very tough statement about what the Iranians are doing. I mean, Iranians are quite isolated right now, but they have, and this is what I was saying when I was asked in the media earlier today about Hegseth's comments. I said, I think the Secretary of Defense needs to have a little more humility. The Iranians do have a lot of capability still, and they are doing a lot of damage to it, particularly to our partners in the immediate neighborhood.
Okay, so just going down the list of the major questions here, and then to prompt the audience to get ready with your questions. But turning to Lebanon, the Lebanon sort of Hezbollah front. So, and arguably, this is maybe even a more, I don't know if it's more relevant, maybe more immediate front for Israel. And thinking about the violence in Lebanon, and Hezbollah's decision to open this front with Israel. And the impact of this, which probably shouldn't surprise anyone, especially in the wake of October 7th, the sort of overreach, perhaps, of the Israelis or potential for serious overreach regarding the bombardment, and now a sort of ground invasion or a half-ground invasion, sort of in the cards. I mean, how should we understand the situation in Lebanon?
Yeah, Lebanon. I was there in October, and I came away from Lebanon a little cheerier. I mean, I was at a low point, but a little cheerier about Lebanon. By the way, I had a 20-minute conversation that's on video yesterday with my colleague and friend Elisa Catalano-Ures, who worked Lebanon for Obama, Bush administration, and the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and then on Capitol Hill. And so we had a 20-minute wide-ranging conversation about Lebanon. It's going to go up on the CFR website in the next day or so. So check it out. Like, you don't have to read Shira Efron in the New York Times today. You don't have to read my friend Hussein in the Atlantic. Oh no, you can read those too. I'm kidding around. It's all about the competition between organizations. No, I think all of us agree. If you read Shira Efron's piece and Hussein's piece and Elisa and I talking, is that the Israelis are blowing a great opportunity for them in Lebanon. They have a government. They have a government that has external support. That all those things point to a gradual normalization of relations between Lebanon and Israel, and that all of those external powers and the government seek to uproot the state within the state that Hezbollah and Iran created over the course of 40 years. But what that doesn't account for is the kind of post-October 7th worldview that is, I think, shared across most of the political spectrum in Israel, which is, if there are people across the border who say they want to kill you and take action on it, believe them. Mm-hmm. And so when Hezbollah fired on Israel, it took them 40 hours. I think they dithered. They were under a lot of pressure from the IRGC to do something. The Israelis decided, there was a moment where there was a debate. do we continue to work with the Lebanese government? Because with the Lebanese government, they want to do this, but do they have the will to do this? And the Lebanese government was, kind of sending feelers like, let's do this together, as they had been doing. But now it was more urgent for the Lebanese government. Or do we just try to kill Hezbollah? And so the debate was focus on Iran and then work with the Lebanese government to just strangle Hezbollah, which will have really nothing left as long as Iran is killed. Or do we go for the jugular in Iran? And the idea was we can do two things at one time, which I think is probably true given Israel's advanced military structures, but actually opposite from the success that they had post October 7th. There was a lot of pressure. Benny Gantz wanted to go after Hezbollah on October 8th. And Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus on Hamas, et cetera, et cetera. And then they went after Hezbollah at the time of their choosing. I think that for, post-war, to maintain the kind of political and diplomatic momentum towards changing the region, which is what Netanyahu said he wanted to do, I think on October 8th or October 9th, what they're doing in Lebanon is the wrong way to go about it. I mean, you can't displace a fifth of the population and then expect people to have goodwill, even those people who hate Hezbollah. I mean, I'm sure there will be people who still want to do it. You hear some wild stuff out of the mouths of some Lebanese about this, but I think it's going to be extremely difficult. And it's extremely sad, too, obviously for Lebanese who are suffering as a result. Two, it seems to me the Israelis are not learning the lessons of their own history, right? And so you're going to have Lebanese suffering, and you're going to have Israeli, about the same age as most of you, who are going to get caught in Lebanon. That's a terribly frightening prospect for them as well, when there was clearly another path.
So they seem to sort of have two disarmament initiatives in which they've decided to employ sort of the firepower only approach. I mean, obviously the situation in Gaza is quite complicated, especially in the context of the Trump plan,
well, I think the difference.
There's nothing political.
I think the difference is that I don't think that there's any chance that Hamas is going to get disarmed, and there's no partner for the Israelis in the disarmament of Hamas. In fact, Hamas's main sponsors are, litigating the 20-point plan to ensure that Hamas is able to hold on to what's left of its arms. In Hezbollah, you have multiple partners. You have the government. You have important sectors of Lebanese society. You have the United States. You have Saudi Arabia. You have the French. You have, a lot of actors there that all have a compelling interest. And at a moment even before the war, when the Iranians were weak, that they could have done it. Now, of course, weak is relative. The Iranians poured $1 billion into Hezbollah after the 2024 ceasefire, and you can see it in the drones that Hezbollah now has. But I think Hezbollah's bark is a little worse than its bite. I mean, every night the Israelis are expecting these huge barrages of rockets, and they get, like 30. I know that sounds. I mean, if you live in the north of Israel, that's a real problem. But it's not the 200 or 300 that they're constantly expecting.
Interesting. Okay, clearly a lot to ask about. Please, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Grateful for questions in the form of a question. So we'll start over here, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. Really,
it was just an Uber ride away, so don't thank me. Don't take much. I'm on my way to the airport anyway, so.
I'm interested in your opinion of who you think benefits the most from this war in the private sector specifically.
In the private sector? Oh, well, if you're a defense company and you build those Patriot missiles and THAADs and all that stuff, and you're a drone company and drone defense company, my goodness, the Gulf states are going to spend huge money on this kind of stuff. I mean, in order to make the Gulf model work after this conflict, they're going to have to assure the world that they can create an iron dome over Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Riyadh and Doha and so on and so forth. So if you are the manufacturers of those things, right, everything from Raytheon here in the United States, or mom and pop anti-drone manufacturers in a basement in Kiev. I'd still call Kiev because I'm I grew up with, everybody talking like, I can't say Kyiv, right? And so I apologize to Ukrainians. I think
No political intention.
what is it? Israel Aircraft Industries that produces the Iron Dome and now the Iron Beam and Arrow and all that stuff. It's going to be an absolute boon to all of those defense manufacturers. If you're asking me if I think the Witkoff and Kushner kids are going to make money on it, I have no idea. I know that they're engaged in all kinds of stuff in the Gulf. I think that I know there's a conspiracy theory out there that they kind of pushed for this war. I think they would have made money regardless of whether there was a war or not. I think it's the kind of I know big media personalities have been pushing that. I think it's eager for smart people to think that way.
Okay. Just moving across. We'll start over here and then so.
I wanted to ask a question regarding Turkey that came up earlier.
Okay.
You mentioned that the Turks are not big fans of Israelis, but Israelis are not big fans of Turks as well. With elections coming up on the campaign trail, and Naftali Bennett said that he views Turkey as the next Iran and the next big threat. But something that is interesting to me is that unlike Iran, that's kind of really solidly in the Russia-China bloc, Turkey is kind of ambiguous because it's also a NATO member, but also a Hamas supporter.
Right.
So for the US specifically, how do you see this evolving and how do you see Turkey in this bigger picture, especially with an Israel that's kind of willing to clearly label them as a threat despite their relationship with the US?
It's a really interesting question, but let me kind of take what you said just now and put a slightly different point on it. It is you're absolutely right that Naftali Bennett said it's the next Iran, and Prime Minister Netanyahu said what he has said about Turkey. But I would say that most of the kind of Israeli security establishment and those people who seriously look at Turkey and Israel have not taken that step. They, in fact, just like the second or third day of the war, I had a standing like Zoom conversation with people from the Israel security establishment about Turkey because they are concerned about it. I was like, are we going to have this Zoom? And they're like, well, if the siren goes off, we'll have to go run to the bunker. But otherwise, we want to have this conversation. So I had this Zoom conversation with these Israelis in the security establishment. And they were looking for ways that they can establish a deconfliction mechanism with Turkey that could then become the kind of launching point for a dialogue on what they said were more complicated issues. So I don't think it's shared. I said to them, I think you can absolutely find a deconfliction mechanism with Turkey in Syria. I don't think that that's going to be a launch point for a different conversation about more complex issues, though. So I think what you're looking at actually is two countries that have very significant problems centered on Gaza, Hamas, which predates October 7th. A leader in Turkey who is ideologically opposed to Israel and also grew up in an anti-Semitic, grew up both at home and politically in an anti-Semitic milieu. And then in Israel, a country that sees that leader allowing the Turkish financial system to be used by Hamas, allow Hamas to run operations against Israel. And so there is this real concern that they could actually end up being enemies. But there's also a search, and I think in both places, for a way to avoid that outcome. Who knows whether it will really happen. There continues to be trade and low-level intelligence cooperation between the two of them. I will say this. I think that Turkey was in a unique position after October 7th, and it blew the opportunity to really be in a unique position. It had just normalized relations with Israel, and it obviously has good relations with Hamas that are different from Qatar's relationship with Hamas and different from Egypt's relationship with Hamas that could have been very useful over the course of the ensuing war, that could have made it end sooner, brought hostages home sooner, and saved lives. But the Turks, for their own domestic political reasons, took the opposite approach. And almost immediately, as was predicted by Turkey watchers, that they would immediately, ramp up the Hitler and Nazi talk and like that. So the problem that I think the Israelis have with Turkey is that it is a NATO member. And so it's easier to target Iran, an isolated country that everybody hates, not Iranians, the government of Iran, and Turkey, which has played this double game. I mean, I would group Turkey among countries that it feels uncomfortable with the exercise of American power ever. But NATO membership serves a whole range of interests. I made this analogy to former Israeli, I'm not going to name it, former Israeli national security official. I said, for Turkey, NATO membership is kind of like Iran's proxies. It's like a get out of jail free card. You can do all these things. You can be malign at moments that you choose to be malign, but it's hard to target you because you're NATO ally. You can, so in the same way that the Iranians, the proxies were their forward strategy of defense, and everybody was like, we're not targeting the Iranians for the very reasons that we see what's going on right now.
Interesting. It's in the middle.
He didn't buy the analogy.
Okay.
I just, playing with ideas. Playing with ideas. That's what we're supposed
We'll
to
get more student questions there. Hope them.
Yeah, thank you again for coming. I wanted to push you back a little bit on Lebanon, if that's okay, because I read the situation differently from you. On two things. First, I find that the Lebanese government has really done a poor job in disarmament. Right before the war started, Matthew Levitt, who's also at Georgetown, had a great article out about how there's been massive failures and shortcomings of disarmament. And I think you can tell based on the fact that Hezbollah has been able to fire from the south that it's not actually disarmed, despite the Lebanese government claiming that. And then number two is that on the popular point of like there's going to be a lot of opposition from the government and people to Israel because of this. I again see it as the opposite. In fact, there's a lot of Shiites coming out today saying we really loathe Hezbollah for bringing us into this for no reason, especially because Lebanon had no interest. And even the broader Lebanese public, there's, I think, bigger hostility than ever before. So it seems like that operation from the Israelis, especially because they waited, is like actually the way to go based on these two variables.
Yeah, I think what I was responding, and thanks for the question, I appreciate it, or the clarification. But what I was responding to in terms of disarmament was, since in the last 20 days, the Lebanese government has done things that Israelis were essentially begging them to do beforehand. Why didn't they do it beforehand? Right? They've arrested Hezbollahis. They've gone into these tunnels and so on and so forth. Where the hell were they? Well, so now they actually suddenly have the will to do it. There's a way to do it in partnership without kind of displacing huge numbers of people. I have heard what you said, that there are from, my Lebanese dentist who's like, yeah, dude, I got Shia friends who are like, hey, Hezbollah. I think there are a range of opinions in Lebanon. But I think that those are valid and authentic positions. But I think as the Israelis push further and further and further, I wonder if, as Jonathan pointed out, that they overplay their hands and waste whatever goodwill that they have. Look, I've heard Lebanese say, "Oh, we can't wait for them to rename this street Bibi Netanyahu Boulevard because he's going to destroy Hezbollah." I mean, I think it's a little outlandish. I think there's a range of opinions on this. I bet we could, line up, 10 different Lebanese, and they'll have. I'm not going to use the old stupid thing that people say about Israel. I bet you have 5 different opinions about this.
I think that was Shira Front speech. So it's not a good record since 1982. Let's just put it that way.
It's not, and like I said, I think that you do, even if the Lebanese government up until this point has been not as good as perhaps people would like. In the last 20 days, they've done stuff that they weren't unwilling to do. So I'm not saying that the Israelis should not have responded to that rocket fire, but now they're like, the mobilization of 70,000 people and so on and so forth. Like, I don't know whether this is intimidation or not, but I don't like. I think the way it's going can undermine a good thing that they had going.
Excellent. I see. Yeah, so sorry, I can't see. Oh, yeah, it's good. One of my students. Yeah,
You told me you had to be here.
Yeah. Free will.
Just so you touched on like the differing interests between the U.S. and Israel when it comes to this current war. I wanted to ask, like yesterday, President Trump said that he knew nothing about how Israel struck the Pars gas field, but today he said that I cautioned him not to do it because Israel officials said he was aware. I think that's arguably worse. But like either way, like how do you think how do you think the exit strategy will roll out for the U.S. compared to Israel? And do you think the differing interest in Iran will become more apparent as the days go on?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think when the president decides to stop, the Israelis will have to stop. I don't I don't see how they continue without it, without the United States at this point. So that whole idea that, when the president says we're done, the Israelis are done, they may be dissatisfied with it. There may be like a huge brawl in like, Washington, commentary about whether it stopped too soon or not. But I think when the president says, I find it very hard to believe that the United States did not know about the Israeli strike on the South Pacific. You have Israeli officers and American officers sitting next to each other prosecuting this war. So I think this is typical of the president, who keeps his options open, is willing to throw everybody and anybody under the bus for his own political purposes. But it struck me that he was on board with it. Why he was on board with it is another question. And I think, given the fact that the Iranians still have the capability to hit back, and they have, although some of the things that they hit, they previously hit. It's not, hitting the gas facilities in Qatar. They'd already done that. They just hit them again. What I would say, though, is what strikes me that the president's strategy, to the extent that he has one, in prosecuting this campaign, is he thinks every time he demonstrates some, awesome amount of American military force, and that he's willing to cross a line that nobody else is willing to cross, that the Iranians will give up. They haven't done that. They've said, okay, you give up, now we're going to cross another line. And so that we do have escalation dominance, but what's the cost of that escalation dominance, right? Bless you. And so what's the cost of the escalation dominance, especially when there's no real conception about what happens next?
Mm-hmm.
Just see, I think Asaf, you had a question.
Yes. Thank you very much. A question about the causes. What do you think are the real underlying causes of the U.S. decision to join the war, and to what extent is this something that is more regional, or maybe like a grand strategic aim? And we haven't talked about China much, also in resources and that sort of thing. Comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's multiple reasons why the president made the decision that he made. I think some of them I talked about. I think the success of Operation Midnight Hammer and the 12-day war, or the 11 days that preceded it, gave him a view of the use of military power. Then add on to that Venezuela, and the president was like, "Oh, we can use military force for certain ends, and it seems pretty easy, right?" I think he really anticipated that the regime would cave, or that he'd be able to make a deal with someone within the first couple of days. And I think and he has said it has surprised him. I think that there's been lots of discussion about, we've now taken Venezuela offline, and that has implications for China, has implications for Cuba, and now we're taking the Iranians offline. That also has implications for China. But I think that may be somewhat overblown. I mean, the Chinese have been storing tons and tons and tons and tons of oil. Now, that can't go on forever. But I'm not sure that was the primary strategic goal here. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm misreading the president. I've met people who are close to him who said to me, "Oh, yeah, everything is calculated." I don't know whether that's true. But of course, these are loyalists to someone, and they have every reason to make the president look like he's calculated and strategic, and so he may be, maybe not. I mean, I think the evidence would suggest. How shall I put this diplomatically? The record's a little more mixed than that. And then there's the other. I mean, again, I hate to engage in like psychology here. The intelligence agencies have this like leadership studies, and like you're supposed to get into the head, but I grew up in New York in the 1980s, so Donald Trump was like a constant presence in my life, so I feel like I know him. And he does have this like great man theory about himself. Only I can fix it. I'm going to do things that no other president. I'm going to break the mold, and I'm going to achieve things that others haven't achieved, and it's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic, and
it'll be beautiful.
Fantastic. He uses fantastic a lot these days, and so. I think I think it's a combination of things. I haven't gotten the whiff, though, that this is about great power competition. I haven't gotten that. One of the problems is And one of the problems he's created for himself is on February 28th or March 1, he didn't go on television and tell the American people why he's doing this, what the actual interest that would be served, and that there's some pain which will be temporary, but will be better off on the other side, right? Like that would be, we wouldn't be sitting here and me trying to psychoanalyze the president of the United States if he had done that. And so I think it's because not because he doesn't have a case. There is a theory of the case. And, to be objection about it, there is a theory of the case. I think the president likes to keep his options open. He doesn't want to. So he says regime changes, like, well, maybe not, the shifting things and so on and so forth. I think it's all part of how Trump seeks leverage and angles in everything that he does. And that leaves the rest of us guessing, which is also part of what he wants us to do.
So there were a couple of questions up in the back. I don't know if people have it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so if you're definitely positioning this as like the war following Trump's whims, and when he starts it when he wants, he ends it when he wants. If that's the case, what do you think who are the voices in his ear influencing him, especially his changing mind?
Like I said, I don't really know. I mean, I don't really know. He doesn't. It strikes me that there are a few people in the room with him all the time. Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff. Is that 5 or 4?
4.
4. I don't know. Throw in someone else. Jared. But Jared's only recently back. And I'm not sure about Jared's influence. I mean, Jared clearly hates Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. President Trump clearly does not. I think they had a difficult time the first, but I don't think that they hate each other. I think Jared absolutely does. So because I read Jared's book, so you don't all have to. I reviewed it for Foreign Policy Magazine. Someone stopped me on the street and said, "You can retire now." So it was. Thank you, Jared. So I don't know. I think, like I said, I think the president's been telling the American people for 10 years or more that he keeps his own counsel on these things, and it's what his gut tells him. That's what makes this whole line of questioning, like, what's the president going to do, really, really difficult. I think he is a uniquely good politician, believe it or not. I think, we sit here in Georgetown, we're like, I think a lot of people, maybe a closet Trump supporter, but I think that I think he's a very, very good politician. And I think he'll know when he needs to do that. I mean, he's won twice. And clearly has something to say to the American people that move them. And I think he was right when he said he could kill someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, right? So he clearly understands something about his charisma and his political magnetism. So I think he'll understand when he has to stop. I just wonder whether, if we have this huge run up in gasoline prices, whether that's going to break the whole. But the polling that I saw from CNN would suggest otherwise. Let's see what happens in the coming weeks or so, especially since the whole thing behind it, one of the logic behind his run for presidency is affordability. This is one of these. I'm going to say honestly, the intellectually honest answer is I don't really know. So this.
Thank you so much for this. You have written extensively on the relevance.
I get that. You've written extensively. You get the. You really go ahead.
I assign your work in my two courses, and of course you've written on the relevance of the Suez Crisis, the 6-day war. If I make the analogy, I guess the conventional wisdom about Israel is Israel has been winning battles but losing war. In the case of Iran, my first question is, to what extent would you assess the countervailing factors, specifically Iran's resolve, Iran's strategic narrative in terms of we are resisting, we are the one who challenged the US and Israel, and its image projection to the Arab street, and also taking into consideration the limits, not the failure throughout history of recapitulation and strategic bombing. We don't have one single case Iran has, or Israel has decapitated, one could say, the commanders of the Iran-Iraq war, but there is a generation that fought in Syria, right, and in Lebanon. This is my first question about coercion and Iran's nationalism, the mobilization of the street. My second question, I tend to challenge you regarding escalation dominance, because it appears that the US and Israel have escalation dominance. But I think that does not necessarily interject with Iran's reciprocal retaliatory measures in terms of missiles, in terms also of the will to escalate, in terms of the will to take the cost, to take a strategic cost. So, two points for coercion and escalation dominance.
There were a couple more questions back.
Yeah,
there.
you want to
take one or two
yeah,
more,
absolutely,
and then we'll
absolutely.
end. So sorry, there were a couple of hands there. I saw. Sorry, yeah, over here,
Yeah,
and
just-
then in the back.
Earlier you were talking about how the Gulf countries care a lot about their relationship with Israel. Why is that?
Okay, and then in the far back. Yeah.
I was wondering how this is all going to end, because we don't see anything that Iran is going to back up, because the new supreme leader has declared that we are going to take the equal value from the enemy's property, and we don't see any hint that President Trump is going to back up. So I just want to ask, is there any possibility that this is going to end, or how it's going to happen?
Can you handle one more? Quick one?
Yeah.
Okay, please. And then we'll fetch it.
Thank you. My question is more about domestic outside of stuff, but as you were saying, President Trump.
Domestic U.S.
Yeah, sorry.
I
But
may or may not answer that.
okay. But as you were saying, President Trump has gotten rid of the foreign policy bureaucracy and the apparatus to like clear the way for his decision making to like act faster, I guess. And that sets us very dangerous, I think, reality, not just now, but in the coming years. So let's say we have a president 2 years from now that's not him. What do you think that rebuilding process is going to be like? Is it going to be easy to rebuild the bureaucracy that he's gotten rid of? To rebuild the checks and balances that were there? To prevent presidents from acting unilaterally? Like, how easy will that be for a future president?
Well, I generally answer questions like that by saying I do policy, not politics, but it's in line with I'm a comparativist by training. I'm a political scientist and comparative by training, and I guess within that historical institutionalist. And so I wonder if you undermine. I think the president relying on 5 people and so on and so forth is slightly different from what he's done in terms of checks and balances and harnessing the judiciary and so on and so forth. And so I wonder, because I think institutions are really important, whether another president, regardless of party, will come to the White House and suddenly recognize that that person has a lot of power, and that will they necessarily want to rebuild all of it? Because of course they have 4, maybe 8 years. And if you are less encumbered, maybe you can do more in different things. I mean, I have a dark view of human nature. I mean, I think we're coming out of a long period of reason after World War II, and I'm not sure that reason will prevail as World War II fades further into history. So I can imagine, and one of the reasons why I say this is people, my Turkish friends, my Turkish opposition friends are like, no, when Erdogan's gone, we'll just snap back to where we're like, no, there can be such a thing as Erdoganism without Erdogan. Especially for someone who's been in power for 25 years or so and has altered institutions, discovered new ones to enhance his own power. So I think, I see Trump in a similar frame. So I don't know. I would like to think that whoever the next president is, regardless of party, would say, this is crazy. We have to build this back. And if they did that, I think it would take a long time. I think there'd be a lot of political fights about it now that we've gone down this road. I think the question back is, how and when does this end?
How does it end? Why does the Gulf?
Oh, if I knew, I'd be like, if I knew, I don't think we'd be sitting here. I'd be making mint on the poly markets. I don't know. I don't know how. I think I think there's a reason why 5 or 6 other presidents never did this, because it's extraordinarily complicated, and because the Iranians obviously aren't going to roll over. I mean, they've been saying, we were talking about this before, for 40 years, that they would close the Strait of Hormuz if there was an effort to overthrow the Iranian regime. which is directly relevant, but let me answer hold on to that thought. Let me answer the question. Why are the Gulf countries interested in the relationship? Well, different Gulf countries are interested in their relationship with Israel for different reasons. I think the Emirati relationship with Israel is one that was actually longer than the Abraham Accords. They see it in terms of both security partnership, a kind of common view of the challenges in the region, focus on in particular on the challenge of Islamism and extremism in the region. I think there's a meeting of the minds there. I think there's a lot of interconnectivity in terms of what the Emiratis wanted to do in terms of their economic transformation and what Israel's really, really good at. Things like tech, AI, health tech, and so on and so forth. I think those things are very, very important. The Bahrainis, I think there's a security aspect to it. The Bahrainis perhaps had the most developed relationship with Israel. It's like when they went to establish the Israeli embassy in Manama, they just like opened the door and it was already there, right? They didn't have to like do anything. And the Saudis, I think it was part and parcel of Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030, which I take seriously. I didn't take seriously at first, but I take seriously now. And that the idea of regional integration, and that in order to have stability and transformation, you need to solve all of these disputes and move forward. Also, there was a security aspect. But I wonder with a weakened Iran, whether the security aspect for all of these countries will be the rationale will be as strong as perhaps it was. Now, on this question of escalation dominance, I mean, I think it's clear that the United States and Israel have escalated. They could bomb the shit out of Can I say that?
You just
I think class will be much more formal, I promise, for those of you. They can. I think that there's a lot more force that the United States can bring to bear, and there's a lot more that they can do to undermine or weaken the Iranian regime. And I think that's what, if you talk to Israelis and you talk to Iranians, there is a 4 to 6 week plan in order to do this. I think I think those military professionals understood that the Iranians would have the ability to respond. I don't think that ability to respond in terms of attacks on the Gulf is a forever thing, the longer this thing goes on. I think there's a finite amount that the Iranians will have left to do. And I think that's the theory of the case, is that at that point, they will cry uncle. I mean, I think we'll still confront asymmetric types of responses, right? We've already seen some of this in Europe. I'm likely to see this elsewhere. This isn't without problems. Like the Iranians will run out and then everything will be great. I don't think that that's the case at all. I think, and this is what I said before about the Secretary of Defense having to have some humility here, because I think that they all believe that the Iranians would kind of cave or just collapse. And I think that's a grave misreading of Iran. I think we have a fight on our hands, but I do think that and I still think that failure is a possibility. But I think when you're talking about the ability of the United States to outgun the Iranians, I think there's no question that we can do that in order to get them to cry uncle. What is important, and I think it's an underlying something that you said, is that the Islamic Republic is a system, and that you have the IRGC, these people are ideological. This was the point I was making, the difference between the Delcy Rodriguez solution and the lack of one in Iran. That these people will fight, especially when the president says on the first day in that video message at 2 a.m. I'll shut up that in a second. Because no, I got to get to the airport. That Iranians should take matters into their own and bring the regime down. Well, if your livelihood, if you're ideological, you believe the whole Great Satan thing, which I believe they do, and the Great Satan is coming to get you, you're going to fight to the death. So I think that was a miscalculation on the part of the United States.
Wonderful. Stephen will be performing at the CJC all year next year. I'll be here all semester. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really excellent. Excellent. Thank you for all for coming.